Bishop's statement, which I hope you've all read, Listen, Learn, Love, a new engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Could I just have a show of hands? Those who think that the referendum campaign has been an uplifting experience for the nation, hands up. Those who think it's been perfectly dreadful, hands up. And those who are undecided or think it's neither here nor there. I'd have to agree with you that it's been pretty dreadful since we were last together. So I'd like to first of all just spell out a bit as to why I think things have gone pear-shaped as they have. You will have picked up when I was with you that I thought there were a few problems with the government processes. Amending the Australian Constitution is a notoriously difficult thing to do. There have been 44 attempts since Federation and only 8 have succeeded. The Labor Party has attempted to amend the Constitution 25 times and they failed 24 times. And sadly, I think they're about to fail for the 25th time. To amend the Australian Constitution, usually it requires a strong bipartisan effort by all of the major players in the Australian Parliament. Why? Because I think you would be able to attest now from your conversations with people in family or at barbecues or even in the workplace that most people don't exercise their minds very much about the Australian Constitution. They presume that it works pretty well, and they think that unless all the politicians are on the same page saying it needs a change, they're likely to be a bit suspicious. And I think that's the space that we've been in. In terms of the recognition of Aboriginal Australians, there have been some key questions that have been confronting us. I think the first for you as educators to face is the question, is some form of recognition necessary or desirable? Now, one thing which I think is quite welcome in the Bishop's statement is that about half the statement is given over to a statement by NATSIC, the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Catholic Council. You might say it's almost an indication that the Australian Church is taking seriously what Pope Francis has said about synodality, namely guaranteeing everyone a place at the table. And if you're going to talk about recognising Aboriginal people in the Constitution, then you need to be listening to the Aboriginal voices. So I think one good thing about the Bishop's statement is that about half of it is given to listening to the voice of the Aboriginal people who actually advise the bishops. And if you're using it as a study resource, I'd particularly recommend pages 11 and 12 of the document where NATSIC speaks about supporting the voice is a start. They say, we in NATSIC know there are criticisms, even from Aboriginal people, but most Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people support the referendum. Now, there'll be a question in some people's minds, how do you know that most Aboriginal people support the referendum? One of the things I would urge upon you and anyone to whom you're speaking in the lead up to Saturday is the very least we can do is be attentive to Aboriginal voices. So I would hope that those who are going to vote no will vote no because of what they've heard from Aboriginal people saying why you should vote no. Or if you're going to vote yes, you'll vote yes because of what you've heard from Aboriginal leaders as to why you should vote yes. NATSIC goes on to say, just as the churches strongly supported the 1967 referendum, we hope that Catholics, along with other people of faith, will support the Yes campaign. Now, I'm not in a position to be doing any surveying, but as on all these things, whether it's same-sex marriage or whether it's recognition of Aboriginal people in the Constitution, my experience is that Catholics basically vote the same way as everyone else does. And if you've got the community split down the middle, chances are you'll have the Catholic community split down the middle. NATSIC conclude their part of this statement saying, "We, NATSIC, feel that the referendum is too important to fail. The consequences for our people and the whole nation would be devastating." I think I may have told you the story when I was with you last at a meeting we had in Darwin with the Catholic education people there. At the end of the session, an Aboriginal woman just said, "Look, most of my mob aren't across all the details and the complexities of all of this. All I know," she said, "is if they wake up on the Sunday morning on the 15th of October and the vote is no, they'll know that they've been rejected by the society which colonised them and dispossessed them in the first place without their consent." And I think that will be the existential situation for a lot of Aboriginal people. Well, that's it in terms of listening to the Aboriginal voices. What approach have our bishops taken? Well, if we go to pages 17 and 18 of their statement, they point out that in 2021, they endorsed the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which speaks of the disempowerment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and of their hopes for a better future. They go on to acknowledge that there is a diversity of viewpoints in the community, but also a diversity of viewpoints in the Aboriginal community. I just come from doing an interview with Kieran Gilbert on Sky about, why is it that things have gone off the rails as badly as they have? And one observation I made is that I think the government was too guided by what had gone on with the same-sex marriage debate. But I think this is very different from same-sex marriage. Same-sex marriage was about saying we treat everyone the same, regardless of their sexual orientation. Same-sex marriage, in fact, was a bit like the 1967 referendum, which was the first referendum we had saying vote yes for Aborigines. But the 1967 referendum was about taking out the negative references to Aboriginal people. And so once again, it was about treating everyone the same. And the one successful Labor Party referendum there's been in 1946 was about extending welfare benefits to everyone. It was about treating everyone the same. So 1946, treat everyone the same. 1967, treat everyone the same. Same-sex marriage, treat everyone the same. This referendum is about saying we think that there is a need to give special recognition to the first Australians and to do it by means of putting a voice in the Constitution which gives them a guaranteed place at the table whenever laws or policies are made which are affecting them. So, with that by way of background, the Bishop said no one should dismiss the recommendations of the Uluru Statement lightly, that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who designed and led the process, who participated in the dialogue and made the recommendations, especially the voice, deserve great respect and a serious consideration of their proposals and their reasons for it. Well, that's code for saying the bishops are not on board saying, we're voting yes with the Uluru Statement, but saying just give great respect to what they've said. They went on to say some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples oppose the voice and the referendum. They propose a different way forward. They and their position deserve respect too. So it's a good thing that our bishops have called for respect to be shown by people from both sides, particularly those who are Aboriginal advocates. They conclude by saying the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference will not tell Catholics or their fellow Australians how to vote in the referendum. Instead, we ask all Australians to seek out information on the referendum proposal, especially from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I've had some very strong advocates in the yes case being critical of me, saying I should be out there more telling people that they should vote yes. And I've said, well, I'm a Jesuit priest who's been in the public square for 40 years. I know enough about my relationship with the Catholic community generally. If Frank Brennan was out there saying vote yes to something, there'd be some Catholics who'd vote yes, But instinctively, there'd be other Catholics saying, well, if Frank Brennan says vote yes, I'll be voting no. So what the effect is practically of a church leader saying, thou shalt vote this way, I think in the 21st century, it just doesn't cut it. I think it's good that our bishops have said, let's be out there listening to all of the arguments. Where I have found our bishops useful is, for example, in Townsville, far north Queensland, and you may have seen some polling that's come out electorate by electorate. North Queensland is a complete disaster for the Voice. Overwhelming majorities wanting to vote no. But I spoke at a big church meeting there in Townsville, and at the end of it, the Bishop Tim Harris, simply got to his feet, thanked me for coming, and said, I want you all to know I'm going to be voting yes. There he was, leading by example. So let me come to some of the questions which people now confront in trying to make a decision about this. The first question, as I said, is some form of recognition necessary or desirable? I think the Australian community is 90% on board with the idea that, of course, there should be some recognition of Aboriginal people in the Australian Constitution. What the people at Uluru decided was they wanted to marry together the idea of recognition with putting a voice into the Constitution. And the Albanese government decided to run very solidly with that, putting the two propositions together. So is some form of recognition necessary and desirable? I'd say undoubtedly the answer is yes. Is it necessary that a voice be placed in the Constitution as the means of recognition? I think there's room for debate on that. For example, you might have seen in recent days Mr. Albanese being asked, well, if it goes down, will you legislate for a voice? And he says, no, he won't. Meanwhile, Paul Keating today has written an article where he reflects back in 1993 on how there was de facto a voice and how it worked well, how he sat down and negotiated with Aboriginal leaders in order to finalise the Native Title Act. Well, that's all very well, but one might almost say to Mr. Keating, well, that wasn't a constitutional voice, so you're actually saying you don't need it in the Constitution. And so these arguments cut both ways at this stage. Someone like myself says, look, if key Aboriginal leaders who I've known and trusted for a long time, people like Patrick Dodson, people like Patricia Turner, I've known them for 30 or 40 years, they're very dedicated to their people, they're very dedicated to the well-being of the nation, and they say they think it's necessary and desirable. I say, well, if they say that, that's good enough for me. But it won't be good enough for all voters, as we've seen. I think the next question is, will it divide the country? And on this one, we also hear a diversity of opinions. I think all of us would agree that sadly, this referendum, the way it's been conducted, no matter how the vote goes on Saturday, we have divided the country further than it was. And that's one of the very sad things about this referendum process. And it's why I've been critical of both sides of politics. I say they've been playing roulette with the country's soul. And it's very sad that we have political leaders who have not been sufficiently attentive to the lessons of history in order to ensure that we don't divide the country over such a critical issue of race relations with our first Australians. Will it divide the country? Someone like Noel Pearson says, no, it won't. It will unite the country better than ever. Someone like Jacinta Price says it will divide the country inexorably. Who's right? Who's wrong? Well, it's not for someone like me to pontificate on that, but once again, it's for voters in good conscience to make a decision. Will it divide the country, or will it help to bring us together? The third question, I think, is will it make a difference? Will it help with closing the gap? Now, once again, someone like Jacinta Price or Warren Mundine says we don't think it will make a difference. But those like Pat Turner, Those like Megan Davis, those like Noel Pearson say we think it'll make a world of difference. We've had several ministers in the Albanese government coming out saying we think it would make a big difference. My own view is that a voice could make a difference, whether it's legislated or in the Constitution. You could argue the toss. But to have a voice of some sort at a national level, which was able to coordinate and bring together listening to the voices of local and regional communities, I think would be a very good thing. And then the final question would be, will it clog the courts or slow down the system of government? Now, you might be aware that all-time great West Australian, Bob French, who was Chief Justice of Australia in retirement, he flew across to Canberra the other day and spoke at the National Press Club in order to express his legal opinion that he thought it would not clog the courts. Now, there are other lawyers who say they think it would. What's it to be? Very difficult for any of us who are not big-time lawyers to give the right answer to that. But people like myself would say, well, if Bob French gives us the assurance it won't clog the courts, I'm prepared to run with that. But then the question is, will it slow down the system of government, namely the means by which the voice will need to consult with government? I think that's a far more complex question, and I think it is an issue on which the evidence has just not been forthcoming. And I think that's a pity. I think government could have done better, particularly through the parliamentary committee processes, to ensure that that could happen. So when you put all of those questions together, you come to the issue about what it is, what am I going to do, how am I going to vote? A couple of other points to make to you as educators. I think one of the crunch issues that has arisen with this debate over the referendum is that we Australians have not really addressed the question about equality and equity for the first Australians, where we have a constitution which gives no recognition whatever to the first Australians, and where, unlike the US, for example, there were not ever any treaties negotiated with those first Australians. One thing I would urge upon you is, particularly those of you who are teaching history or teaching politics or teaching philosophy, go and have a look at the essay written by Bain Attwood in the Australian Book Review of July. Bain Attwood is the doyen of progressive historians from Monash University. He wrote the definitive history of the 1967 referendum, and he also was commissioned to write the official biography of William Cooper, who was a prominent Aboriginal leader in Victoria. Bain Attwood pointed out that one of the philosophical problems confronting us in this referendum is, for the first time, Australians are being asked to recognise group rights, not just individual rights, and to recognise that we're not just saying we treat everyone the same, but that indeed there is a case for giving special recognition permanently in the Constitution to those who are first Australians. Now, that's a discussion that just hasn't gone on here in Australia. Maybe I might give an example from the United States, and it's the lawyer in me. You may be aware, it's a very conservative US Supreme Court at the moment, very conservative. They gave a decision 6-3 recently, where they said that you could never bring into account factors of race when making determinations as to who could get into Harvard, that any consideration of race would be discriminatory and not permitted under the Constitution, where you guarantee equal protection. Now, that was a 6-3 decision. You can argue the toss on it. The very same court, within the month, gave 2 decisions on American Indian cases. One was a case of Arizona against the Navajo Nation. The Navajo Nation is classified under US law as a dependent nation within the United States. And the question was, what was the carve-up of water rights between the Navajo Nation and the state of Arizona. Another extraordinary decision was the upholding by the court, by 6-3 once again, of the Indian Child Welfare Act. Now, this is an act of the Congress pursuant to the US Constitution, which conducts itself in the following way. There was a case where there was no doubt that it was in the best interests of this individual child that the child, who was an American Indian, should be placed with a non-American Indian family, because that family had cared for the child for years. They were wonderful parents. The parents wanted to keep the child. The kid wanted to stay with those parents. The US Supreme Court upheld the application by the tribe to have the child returned to the tribe because of the tribal rights that exist. Now, in Australia, I dare say that would be seen to be much more controversial than it is in the United States. But it does highlight the different philosophical considerations that are coming into play. So, coming back to what's before us, as our bishops have said, they issued another statement the other day, which you should have a look at, towards the referendum, a statement from the Australian Catholic bishops. It was issued on the 18th of September with, I think, a covering note from your Archbishop Costello, who is the president of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. And they said, the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference's statement on the voice urged that the debate be conducted civilly and respectfully, and however differently they are viewed, the issues surrounding the voice are not just political, they are moral and ethical. And you might have heard that's the line Noel Pearson is now pushing in these last few days. Forget about all the constitutional, all the legal, all the political stuff. What morally and ethically should you do? And that, I think, ultimately is the question for you as Catholic educators. And as I say, first and foremost, I think you need to be attentive to Aboriginal voices and then make a decision in good conscience. And to accept this, the wording in the constitutional provision, I'm not as convinced as Bob French that the words are perfect. I, in fact, think there's some imperfections there. But guess what? Nothing in this life is perfect. Definitely nothing that comes out of Canberra is perfect. I don't have to convince you from Perth that anything that comes out of Canberra is perfect. But us, with our Christian belief, we believe that perfection comes in the next life. And here we are. We're presented by our politicians, faltering though they be, with an imperfect set of words, and we're left with the question, do we think Australia would be better to do this now rather than put it off? Or do we think that at some stage in the future we might be able to get it better? My own view is this has been dragging on since 2007. No guarantee we'll ever have a better combination than Albanese, Dutton, Pearson and co. I think it's time to get it done. But I genuinely admit that's not a compelling argument to say to everyone, thou shalt vote yes. And whatever happens on Saturday, let's bear in mind there'll be a lot of very hurt people, particularly in the Aboriginal community, and we as educators need to be able to reach out to them. So that's enough from me. Happy to take any questions or discussion or particular observations. Could you tell me, has the atmosphere changed over there very much since I was over there with you? And if so, how? And if so, why?
I think we've been missing you, Father Frank, so I think we can all agree.
Yeah.
I think the debate over here has probably been as polarising as it has been over East. I think we'd possibly agree with that. And I think we just all have to wait and see what the outcome will be. So just a final call for any questions to Father Frank before we... Oh, I've got a question.
Hi, Frank. My name's Luke. Just a couple of things. I've been resigned for a while that this will be a no vote. So my attention's been really focused on how do we turn, I don't accept that this is going to be a pessimistic outcome. How do we turn this no into a good result for Australia? How do we rephrase or reframe the debate or discussion? I've just come away from a holiday with a brother-in-law who tried to tell me this is racist by preferencing one group. And that's part of what you were saying earlier about the inequality. So if this is a no, how do we make it a good no and move the discussion forward?
I think, it's a great question, and I think the only way it can be done is, first of all, by reaching out and firming up relationships, particularly with First Australians, particularly those who are most hurt by the result. I think then it's a matter of regrouping us socially and politically. I don't think any attempt can be taken to undo whatever happens on Saturday for quite a considerable period of time. But I think it's to build on the positive view that most people agree that there is a need for some recognition of the first Australians in the Constitution. So can we work together now over a longer period of time to see what points of agreement there might be between the major political parties and the key Indigenous leadership of the country? But as I say, I think that will be over a very protracted period of time. The other thing I would say is that I think for us as a church, it has been an opportunity for NATSIC to come of age, though it not be very well resourced. And I think for us as church, committed to a synodal view of things, that we as church should make sure that we have NATSIC at the table whenever we're dealing with these matters in the future. And I must say, I think it's very good. I got a photo just yesterday from John Lakoviak, who is the chair of NATSIC, and he's over there at the Synod in Rome. He sent me a photo of himself with a Maltese Jesuit, a mate of mine, who's there as a translator. And to think that someone like John Lakoviak, Aboriginal man from Adelaide, can be there now with the Pope in Rome over these couple of weeks, I think that sort of thing is a positive development.
Thank you, Father Frank. So I think we'll just draw to a close now, unless we've got any final questions. I think not. I think everyone's getting quite hungry over here. It's lunchtime, lunch o'clock. So, Father Frank, I might stand in front of the camera so you can see me. I'd just really like to thank you on behalf of the college. It's always a pleasure to hear your voice and to be guided by your wisdom. So can we all give Frank a round of applause?
Right. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you.
And hope you enjoy your lunch, and don't forget to vote.
Thank you very much, Father.